listening to Under the Umbrella podcast. Each week, we'll discuss various topics under the umbrella of the LGBTQ community. And I'm your host, Angel. Hey everyone, welcome to an episode of Under the Umbrella podcast. I am your host, Angel, and today's guest is Eion Cashman, and today's topic will be discussing Transgender Understanding. Eion Cashman is the Transgender Navigator at Southwest Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Eion has worked for the Southwest Center for the past 2 years, where they serve individuals touched by HIV/AIDS through prevention, education, client-centered services, and coordinated care in collaboration with community partners. The vision of Southwest Center is to eliminate infection and improve quality of life for communities touched by HIV/AIDS. With that said, let's get to it. Hi, Eion. Welcome to an episode of Under the Umbrella podcast. How are you?
I am good, really good. Sun shining, COVID's still going, but I figured out how to make iced coffee, so we're okay.
So if you wouldn't mind, will you please share with my audience, what does it mean to be transgender for those who do not know or understand?
So being trans is not as simple and as straightforward as the media tends to portray, although we're starting to get more recognition in the media. So for instance, Laverne Cox's Disclosure documentary that just came out on Netflix. Go watch. If you're a cisgender person, go watch. It will be a nice little introduction to everything. But my definition of trans, what I include trans persons as, is anyone who is not cisgender, by which I mean a person who is cisgender is somebody who was assigned something at birth. So, for instance, most of my family members, my mom was assigned female at birth. She grew up as a woman, as a girl into a woman, and she identifies as a woman. It all kind of lined up. But for me, I was assigned female at birth, and the doctors did the best with the information they had, but ultimately I was not a woman. I was not a girl. I was a boy. Everybody was telling me I was a girl. And eventually I grew into a man. And so I'm considered transgender. Cis coming from the Latin root meaning same side and trans meaning across. I think too, though, it's worth noting that trans is a very fluid term that's been developing over the past few decades. And right now, it may or may not include non-binary persons. Non-binary is a gender expression above and beyond the binary of man and woman. Non-binary is an uncategorized gender that is basically the ultimate epitome of queering gender. And so if you are not a categorized gender, of course you're not going to fit wholly into the category of anything. So you can be cisgender, or you can be transgender, or you cannot be. And so usually when I refer to the trans community as a whole, which is anybody who I consider not cis and may at some point be called trans, I say trans and or non-binary, transgender and gender non-conforming. And all of those terms are they have some tentative definitions, but we're developing them as we go. And it's one of the most beautiful things I've seen about when you think of a word and you're like, I know what that means. But with the queer community, our words tend to be very adaptive to our experiences. And it's one of the things I love the most, especially for the trans community, because we use language to work for us, not the other way around. We don't abide ourselves to the boundaries of language. So long story short, not cisgender, but it's a little bit more than that.
Thank you you for explaining cisgender and non-binary, because those are terms I'm starting to hear a lot more also. And I did an episode talking about pansexual and bisexual identities. And I remember those terms kept coming up in the conversation, and I didn't think to ask to define it for those who didn't know. Even though Google is available, Bing, whatever search engines, you can look it up, but just so it's easily, so people can hear it and be like, oh, okay, that's what that means. So thank you for explaining that for the audience. So with that being said, will you please explain, tell me about your journey as a trans man? I know we've had cyber conversations, but I'm anxious to hear your story, and of course the audience, so that they can just have an understanding of, because you've been through some stuff on your
Yeah,
journey.
I have, but I also think it's worth noting too. My experience is my own. Every trans person's experience is fundamentally different. Like, I've even read stories of trans twins, so identical twins who were assigned one thing at birth and transitioned together into something else. And even
Yes,
their stories.
I've
Uh,
seen stories like that also.
yeah, and it just goes to show just how unique gender is to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's also worth noting too that my experience is steeped in privilege. I am
Mm-hmm.
white, and that has opened up a lot of doors. Uh, I also am the son of immigrants. So my mom is from Ireland, and thank God I had her because she pushed education on me like no other. So I'm also college educated. And my transition projected me into the highest level of privilege there is, where not only do I pass, or I'm rather assumed as a man everywhere I go, as a cisgender man. Like, people look at me and they don't think trans, they just think man.
Mm-hmm.
But more often than not, I've been assumed to be straight. I'm not, I'm gay, but people assume I'm straight. So people assume that I am like top shelf straight white man power privilege. And that opens up a ton of doors. So like, my transition is filled with burden, and I'll kind of unpack that story a little bit. But it's one of the easier ones. Um, so yeah, and oftentimes when we talk about trans persons, we want to go back to childhood and whatever. I'm truly an Irish person in that I don't remember my childhood too much. Um, I know that I am like clinically, classically gender dysphoric. So if you look at the DSM diagnosis for transgender persons, it used to be gender identity disorder. Now it's gender dysphoria. It's still pathologizing an identity, and it needs to stop. But when I was a kid, I just acted like a boy, and I kind of thought everybody would get a clue one day that, oh, he's not a she, but they never did. And so at one point, the pressure became too great in my little Catholic kind of neighborhood. I was getting too old to be a tomboy, and I started getting beaten up and bullied and things. And my mom came to me and she's like, if you just started acting like a girl, none of these bad things would be happening.
Mm-hmm.
She was doing the best with the information she had.
Right.
So I went like 180 and started doing modeling work. I had hair down to my butt, started wearing makeup, really trying to present as femme as possible. And I just was, the word that a lot of people use when they look back on me at that age before I had started medically and socially transitioning, was just uncomfortable. I constantly looked uncomfortable. I didn't look like I settled in my own skin. Every photo of me, I looked grumpy or uncomfortable. And then my dad passed away. It was pretty sudden. And right after that, I got very, very sick, and I nearly passed away myself. And as I got out of the hospital, I went, fuck this. Life is too short to try to live up to other people's expectations. And
Yes.
that earlier that year, I had heard the word transgender for the first time in a college class, and I'm like, that's a thing. and then deeply rooted it in the seeds of my, like the deep seated part of my memory, because I just couldn't process that information in the moment. But screw it, like that's what I was. Like I recognized it in that moment, and then after nearly dying, I went, screw it, I don't want to be surviving anymore. I want to actually live. I nearly lost something so precious without even realizing it. And so I went to Goodwill and I loaded up on a whole bunch of clothes that made me look more like a lesbian than a man. But I, without realizing it, bought 5 plaid shirts.
Oh,
So, yeah. And
oh my
like
God.
it took a while for testosterone to touch my face. And I cut off my hair and everything, but the stylist didn't listen to me when I said I wanted a masculine haircut. So she actually gave me a pixie cut. So there was quite a few months there where a lot of women were hitting on me. And one of the barriers to my transition at first was like, I knew that I I wanted to be a man, but I also knew that I liked men, and I had absolutely no idea that you could be trans and gay. Like it just did not occur to me.
I think that
Like
right there confuses a lot of people. Yes.
it's just like it's not something that, like, why would I transition into being a man when I like men? Like what how does that even work? And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what the word queer was. I didn't know what LGBT stood for. I knew nothing. Um, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to anything, and Google searches were particularly unhelpful because I didn't even know where to begin. So I just knew that I wanted to wear boys' clothes and to cut my hair, and I was going to figure it out. Um, and so I started figuring it out, and I found through one of the internet spirals, I think I was using Stumble Upon, which is now defunct. I found this comic called Chaos Comics. It's by Tab Kimpton, a non-binary artist. I highly recommend them. Where there is a story about a character named Tom who is a trans man and he was gay. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm not the only one. Oh, so this is how this works. Um, and then I noticed in that comic that people were connecting with community. And I'm like, oh, I've got to find other people like me. And so I went to the LGBTQ Resource Center on my campus, and I met another trans person who was the director at the time, who ended up becoming my boss for an internship. And without realizing it, like I had already at that point started my medical transition where you have to, at that time, I had to go to therapy for a year to get a hormone letter. That's no longer required. Now you can go to the doctor and get hormones. We do something called informed consent, and that's where you go to the doctor and you just get hormones from the doctor. But when I transitioned back in 2011, I had to go to therapy for a whole year, and I couldn't even get into a therapist for like a year. So 2011, the clock starts. I start socially transitioning. Around 2012, I finally get to start therapy. And on May 4th, 2013, I got my first ever testosterone shot. And I was lucky in that there were really no changes until the 8th month mark, and then a lot of things changed really quickly. And I started being assumed as cisgender pretty quickly. So as I'm doing this advocacy work and stuff, and hearing the struggles of other trans persons who weren't as lucky as I was in transitioning. They were struggling, the hormones were taking slower, maybe they had started transitioning later, maybe they didn't have access to care. I was hearing their stories and their struggles, while at the same time, every day things were getting better for me and getting more removed from those struggles. Mm-hmm. As they were struggling, I was moving into privilege. And it became this really weird place where nobody knew I was trans. Yet here I was just discovering my community, and I was kind of privileging out of it. I couldn't relate to a lot of their stories. And part of that was just I was in a small town. And so over the next few years, I wavered in and out of the trans community, but it kind of just kept coming back where maybe because I'm eloquent, maybe because of my level of privilege, maybe because I was just in the right place at the right time a lot. But over the past decade, I've been in some ways called to service, whether it was starting that first trans support group, or I got to serve on the LGBTQA advisory board for my university to make sure that our insurance policies were trans inclusive, or even to my current position where now I'm a trans navigator at Southwest Center, and it's my literal job that I get paid for, which is so cool.
Yes.
To help trans people transition.
Yeah.
So it's like my journey as a trans person is not like most, in that once I figured out what I needed, I just went for it, and I'm kind of like very stubborn. Like I may be a Cancer, but I act like a Taurus. Like if I want if I want something, I will get it. And I have this innate ability to push on those systems that hold a lot of us trans persons back. Mm-hmm. And then as it became easier for me, I noticed where other people were struggling, and I naturally fell in this thing of like, oh, you do this person, you talk to this, and then you do this, and then you go here and do that. And that evolved into, eventually there was an opportunity at Southwest Center to do that as a job. And I'm like, well, I've been doing this for free for a decade, so yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and a lot of it was luck, and a lot of it was circumstance, and a lot of it was me walking into privilege and having a lot of good mentors along the way who checked me on that privilege. Like there was one point where I was part of a fraternity and I was a misogynistic douchebag asshole, and it took one of my professors going, you know that this is wrong, why are you acting this way? And so like I went back on the path of being a radical accepting queer. And left my fraternity.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for emphasizing your story, because I don't want anybody to assume that everybody's story is the same. I thought that went without saying, but sometimes it needs to be said, so thank you for saying that. You just reminded me, like when I first talked to you, that was one of the first things out of your mouth was, is your new walk in privilege. And I know that word is a trigger word out of this world for so many people, and they hate hearing it. And it's like, it's a real thing. You can call it whatever you want to, but it's a real thing. I even saw a story. I think it was a TED talk of a transgender woman, white woman, and she was on an airplane, getting on an airplane or something, and people were just so rude to her and kind of like pumping her and just very dismissive of her. And in that moment was when she realized she no longer had privilege. And there was some other stuff that she said, of course, but she realized on her journey of becoming a woman, the privilege that she lost. And I just thought that was very huge. You know what I mean? And I was like, damn. So when I hear you now say it, now that you're, a white male, you see your privilege. And I know for a fact that you use it for damn good purposes, for your activism and all that good stuff. Thank you so much. Y'all can ask him about his activism.
I honestly, I just try, and a lot of it was like people, like you said, privilege is definitely a trigger word for a lot of people. But the best definition I've heard for it is privilege is that you just don't have to think about it. So like cisgender privilege, I guarantee most cisgender people have never had to think about where they have to pee. Have never had to think about whether or not they can change safely in a locker room. Have never had to think about when to give birth to their children and whether or not they will be listed as the mother or the father on the birth certificate. Or how to update your documents, like what you would need to do to update your documents, or even if you have control over your documents. Like a lot of those cisgender privilege that cisgender people don't have to think about. And there's a lot of things like white privilege, like white people don't have to think about. I don't like getting pulled over by the cops because they can see my dead name and my old gender in the system, which terrifies the crap out of me. But I cannot imagine the level of fear it would be if I was a black man. Like, I don't have to think about that on a daily basis. And for other things too, like straight people. They don't have to think about whether or not they could be fired from a job. And even with the recent SCOTUS passing, like, thank you, SCOTUS, for recognizing that LGBT workers deserve protections, but I live in an at-will state. You live in an at-will state. They might not fire me for being gay or trans, but they could fire me because I missed the spot on the floor when I mopped. It doesn't matter what reason they assign, but we both know that it wasn't the spot.
Exactly.
So it's like, when you don't have to think about something, that is not something that inherently makes you a bad person.
Exactly.
It's not, this is not your fault. Your privilege is not your fault. I free you from that, any person who's listening. However, once you become aware of whatever privilege you may hold, and we all hold some level of privilege and some level of disparity. Once you become aware of that, it is your responsibility to then be a decent person and figure out how to leverage your privilege for those who do not have it. And if you want to sit complacently and not do anything, fine. But what I usually tell people is, then you are being complacent while people are suffering. And if you're fine with that, so be it. But I'm not okay with people suffering. I don't know why it affects me so deeply and others not, but when I see my trans siblings of color, particularly lately, suffering, or my non-binary siblings suffering because of their invisibility or because their increased visibility without protections, I can't just not do something. So like when I look at who I am and go, well, nobody will listen to them, but maybe they'll listen to me enough to where I can make a space at the table, and then let them speak for themselves. Or people keep asking me about my transition and what my experience is, and I can just deflect to other people like Laverne Cox, a trans woman of color who's done more for this community than I can ever hope to. Or Tam Kipton, a non-binary artist who has brought forth queer identities more than most other artists on the internet. Or Sophie LaBelle, a trans woman who does a political comic called The Sign of Male, where she talks about children's experiences outside the gender binary. Like, it's, if I'm given a platform, I know, or if I'm just by being myself, I am given more opportunities and more ability to affect change based on my privilege. So I just know that I need to be cognizant of how do I make sure that this privilege is put to work for more than just me.
Yeah. Really are. I'll get to my next question, so I won't do like I did on that one episode all over here. So you've mentioned Southwest Center several times. Will you please tell us how Southwest Center helps serve the transgender community?
So Southwest Center, also known as Southwest Center for HIV/AIDS, started out as the Phoenix Body Positive in 1980. Oh gosh, I should know that off the top of my head. Which is basically at that time for persons who had HIV. And I call back to that time because the Body Positive wasn't serving trans persons at that time that I know of. 1990, not 1980. So they weren't serving trans persons, but Southwest Center did something particularly unique. So Phoenix Body Positive, now Southwest Center. They let women into the groups. And at the time when HIV was first started, it was called gay-related immune disorder or gay cancer. It was really targeted, heavily focused on men, and it still is in the United States. Persons who are identified as men who have sex with men are more likely to have HIV. But there were still women in Phoenix, Arizona who had HIV and who had children who had HIV, even if they were negative themselves. And they really had nowhere to go. And so the Phoenix Body Positive invited them to join. And I think there in our historical roots is that Southwest Center realizes that disparities may be different across genders and experiences may be different, but there's room for us to serve you. Q2 2018, July 11, 2018, I was hired as the condoms coordinator. So anytime you got a free
Happy
condom.
anniversary to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It came and went, and I was like, oh, 2 years? But I was hired as the condoms coordinator, and for that year, if you got a free condom in the state of Arizona, I was likely the guy packaging that or ordering that. And as things tend to do when you're a trans person, we have a wellness clinic that was serving trans persons, giving hormone replacement therapies, surgery letter referrals, what have you. We had a behavioral health clinic that was serving trans persons, mainly writing for surgery referrals and things like that. We were doing gender marker letters, but it wasn't particularly organized. And all the providers at that time were cisgender. So they didn't know what it was like for their clients to be trans. And to their credit, they didn't go to their clients and go, so tell me what you need care-wise. 50% of trans persons have to educate their doctors. And I'm thankful to the providers we had at Southwest Center at that time because they didn't do that. Instead, they came to me looking for resources. Well, I already had a full-time job and the trans stuff was starting to become more and more and more. And so I went to my boss and I went, you need to make a decision. Either I'm the condom guy and I focus on condoms, or I am the trans guy and I focus on trans. I cannot do both. I cannot do both. I can't even do one of them well. It's so much work. I can't do both anywhere. Nonprofit work is exhausting and non-ending because the need is there. And having 2 full-time jobs in the span of 1 week, not possible. I had a little bit of a breakdown. He's like, we're gonna fix it. And they found funding. The Caitlyn Jenner Foundation and Gilead Pharmaceuticals gave us some startup grants.
Nice.
Which is really important because it's very difficult to get startup funding for any program, but government funding back then and now under the Trump administration actually bars any transgender specific funding. So if we don't really qualify for a grant from the Department of Health and Human Services for trans care, we qualify for HIV care, but not trans care. And so it's really hard to create a program that serves trans persons if you can't fund it. So we got that startup program and I got the news, congratulations, you are the full-time trans navigator. And I sat for probably like a full day at my cubicle trying to organize things and envision what this program would be because it was so open-ended. And I went, you know what? I shouldn't be envisioning what this program needs to be. I should just be listening to what this program needs to be. So I just started setting up sessions with people. I just advertise it. If you are not cisgender, if you're questioning, if you're non-binary, if you're trans, if you're intersex, come and talk to me and I'll see how I can help you. And that first year I got about 100 clients. And they all generally had pretty similar concerns, finding accessible healthcare with informed providers, number one concern. And it wasn't just for hormones, it was for primary care too. So like if you're an intersex person and you have genitalia that is somewhere between a penis and vagina and you don't know if you need a pap smear, are you gonna trust some Joe Schmo doctor who may or may not have voted for somebody who wanted to take away your rights? No. So the finding accessible healthcare for hormones and everything else, finding insurance coverage, because the two are so intimately intertwined because healthcare costs are outrageous in this country. Getting documents updated. And with that, getting the documents updated so that you can get a job as yourself. A lot of my clients wanted to work, needed to work, had to work, were able to access different parts of transitioning, particularly for my trans feminine clients when they really started being assumed as a woman all the time. If their document read male or had a masculine name tied to it and they showed up to work as themselves, they didn't stay in that job particularly long. So really getting over these healthcare hurdles and these legal hurdles so that they can get over the economic hurdles of like furthering their lives and building up their careers and going to school. So that was kind of the trifecta I was working with of let's get you care, let's get you documents, and let's get you so a place where you're supporting yourself. And that's where the trans program has kind of led to this day where I can't do all of that for my clients, but I'm intimately familiar with the practices of working with healthcare, of finding providers and updating documents so that I can lower those hurdles as much as humanly possible so that they can get over them. And now that we know what those hurdles are and we've lowered them to the best that they can be, so like I can throw together a name change packet in 5 minutes, but it's up to them to pay the $333 to change their name. Now it's now that we know all the barriers in place and we know generally how we've lowered them as much as possible, and I'm pretty familiar with it, and the community's pretty familiar with it, I think the next step for the trans program at Southwest Center, and where we tend to be going, is that we're becoming a really integrated health center based on client-centered advocacy, where everybody is on board with supporting trans persons in their experiences and also advocating for the removal of those barriers whenever possible. So we used to require therapy letters for hormones. Now we're an entirely informed consent clinic because going to therapy costs money, and you shouldn't need a note from a therapist when it's a decision between you and your doctor. I know in the future, I would like to start a project where we change the whole name change system and we work with different partner organizations to make the system more streamlined and honestly more cost effective. Because like it's impossible to change your name if you're working a minimum wage job. Like how are you going to save up $300? So it started off as just listening, and then it started off as really identifying those hurdles and lowering them. And now collectively, I would like to help gather the community, and COVID put a little bit of interruption with this, gather the community and gather resources at Southwest Center so we can advocate for change so that we don't have these hurdles to begin with. We're not just going to patch the system, we're going to fix it so that trans persons can live their full authentic lives without undue burden. It's a lot.
No, it is. There's so much work to be done. So much work to be done.
Yeah. And I love it though, my job. There's a new challenge every day. Like I get to Google the most fun things. So for instance, if you know the identity of a sperm donor and it's a private donation, does that person have any parental rights? Does that person have parental rights if the person who is pregnant is male? And yeah, and then, so like if a trans man got pregnant through a sperm donation of a private sperm donorship, what parental rights would that person have?
So in my head, with you saying all of that, when somebody donates sperm, there's no rights to it anymore. In my head, they would sign a waiver or something saying that they don't want any rights in the event somebody gets pregnant. Is that wrong to assume?
Yes and no. So it was a lot to unpack because like generally most things I found, and this is me not being a lawyer, this is me doing enough research so that my client can have an educated conversation with a lawyer, is the state and the government will default to the best interest of the child, which is particularly risky for trans folk because there is precedence for our kids being taken away, even if they're biologically ours, because we're considered a bad influence on the child's development. That is not the case across the 50 states, but in Arizona, there is some precedence for that. Then there's also the implications of the client may or may not have updated their documents. And so if he identifies as he, him, and he's pregnant, on but he hasn't updated his documents, he would be listed as the mom on the kid's birth certificate. But we had to figure out a way to make sure he would be listed as dad, and what that would take, and whether or not he had to be listed as mom and we had to update dad later, him to dad later. So like that's one of the fun parts of my job. Other fun parts too are like how one of my clients is privileged enough and lucky enough to be able to buy a house. However, they just changed their name. And for whatever reason, the credit bureaus are not updating their name. How do we get the credit bureau to update their name in time for them to purchase this house? Because they're missing 2/3 of their credit report. They can't get a loan if their credit report is incomplete. And it actually looked like they had somebody's social security number at one point. There was a flag on their account, and it turns out that we had to call the credit bureau and make sure somebody was standing by the fax machine, because we had to go back to 1980 to get this solved, and then fax in the name change paperwork for somebody to pull off of that fax machine and then manually update it. It would have updated by itself over a longer period of time, but the computers that talk about changes, like in bank account names and things like that, don't communicate with the credit bureaus super quick. And there are different places where old name pops up. Sometimes I get mail in my dead name still, and I'm like, what account has that? So it's like, it's always an adventure, and it's always wonderful. Because I get to see this multifaceted experience of what it's like when the binary absolutely breaks down about how it's not serving anyone in our society anymore, and all the hoops we have to go through, and coming up with these really clever, creative solutions to get things done. And then when the opportunity strikes, presenting, well, let me tell you about how ridiculous it is to update somebody's documents in Arizona. Let's fix it.
Wow. Well, I'm pretty sure everybody that comes in contact with you I hope they're very appreciative of you, because I've worked for a not-for-profit, I've worked for an attorney's office, I've worked for the courthouse, and just you saying all of that, I know what work you're doing. That's a lot. That is a lot.
I know more about foreign judgments than any person with a science degree should know. Like, I majored in biomedical science and psychology. I shouldn't know the law this intimately, but I do. I often joke that in order to transition, somebody has to become a medical assistant and a paralegal. That is how ridiculous a lot of these systems are. To update your name, your gender marker, get access to healthcare. Like, sometimes the hoops we have to go through, it's gotten better since the Affordable Care Act, but the hoops we used to have to go through for instance, if I updated my documents and then I needed a hysterectomy, well, it says I'm male on my insurance, and so of course it's going to reject the hysterectomy. And the Affordable Care Act has since updated it, so there's different prefixes and stuff that the doctors can submit, and then the insurance company goes, oh, this person just has this organs. These organs, but it used to be like it would be rejected, and then you have to call the rejections office and then file an appeal and then explain to like 5 different departments why you're filing the appeal. All the while, you still need this hysterectomy.
Oh my gosh.
The exercise I do in ally building classes and things like that is I will ask cisgender persons to think about, to really, how we said privileges, you don't have to think about it, to really think about how gender impacts their everyday life. And when I give them a good 5-10 minutes of quiet contemplative time and then like another 5 minutes of discussion, they name a few things. But then we start talking about things like this, like, did you know that your gender, what your gender marker listed on your ID is tied with every single insurance code you do? Do you know that it's tied with your like credit reports to verify your identity? You know it's tied with your employment history, and a lot of people do bring up employment. But do you know that's also tied to things like your 401k and trying to get that updated, paying your health insurance there, the clothes you wear, the bathrooms you use, all the things you see in the media are definitely very important. Like that surface level things we ever see. But gender is such an ingrained system. The gender binary is such an ingrained system in our society that anytime anyone dares try to defy it, they are met with a mountain of bureaucracy. And I would argue bullshit.
Yeah.
And so it is my job to chip away at that mountain one case at a time. And if I see the opportunity to use some dynamite to blow up parts of it, so be it.
So I remember being on Southwest Center's website. So I wanted to ask you, for our listeners, how would someone go about getting in contact with Southwest Center to volunteer? Is that still a thing?
It is.
Okay.
I know that we're still taking volunteer applications. You can go to swcenter.org/volunteer. It should go to our outreach, our Ignite outreach specialist. I think I got your title right. Sorry, Jericho. It should go to Jericho. He will filter through them, and if we have any digital volunteer work that needs to be done, like doing files remotely and things, he should assign it. Things have slowed down a little bit with COVID for volunteering, but our services at the same time are ramping up. COVID is a mixed bag for trans persons because a lot of us are stuck at home with unaccepting families. A lot of us are out of work and have therefore have lost our health insurance. However, a lot of people have also gotten on health insurance for the first time. And a lot of people who, particularly trans persons in rural areas of Arizona, have been able to get in contact with doctors because now we're able to offer telemedicine visits. So I've heard from people as far south as Yuma and as far north as Snowflake, Flagstaff, Pine Top area, looking for a doctor, and we'll see you at Southwest Center, over the phone, online. I've been helping a lot of people move forward with their surgery because there's a lot of paperwork you have to file, and now that people are stuck at home, they've been furloughed, so they still have their insurance, but they're not working, so we're able to advance their surgeries, and we can get you connected with our behavioral health team that can write surgery letters. All of this is at swcenter.org, but you can also call our front desk to schedule an appointment at 602-307-5330, and that's listed on our Google page and on our website.
Cool.
So our volunteer need is going a little bit down for right now, but we are ramping up our services to be to reach as many people as possible during this pandemic, and hopefully this will allow a lot of people to get care. And we actually, I should have promoted this. We just launched our teletesting program where we don't just send you an HIV test. We send you an HIV test and then we book you an appointment to where you're on video chat like this with one of us.
Cool.
And we will walk you through that testing appointment step by step about how you do the test, how you read the results. And if you came back as HIV positive, we get you connected with Michael Shepard. He's our early intervention specialist, and he will connect you to all the resources of Southwest Center and all the resources for HIV positive persons as quickly as possible. Ideally, like as you come up positive, we connect you with Michael so that every step of the way you are not alone. So hopefully, as we're ramping this up, we'll find more opportunity for digital volunteer work. You may not hear from us right away, but those are some of the things you may be working on in the future.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Oh my goodness. I appreciate your time, Ian. That was my last question. I told my wife earlier, I was like, I'm going to try my hardest to stay on task because I have a gazillion questions pop up in the middle of, the interview. And I'm like, stay on task, Angel.
It's okay.
It makes it more fun. It makes it that
honestly,
much more authentic and not like controlled, so to speak.
And I booked an hour and a half to 2 hours for this. So like you have my time.
Cool.
So if there's anything you want, if there's anything additional you wanted to ask now that like the perfunctory stuff is out of the way, like this is what Southwest Center does. This is what trans really means. This is what I do. Or if you've heard things from viewers or commenters that have come up, because I've listened to a few of your podcasts before and some trans identity stuff has come up. I have time
Yes.
for you.
I appreciate that. Well, I know for me personally, I'm making it my business to educate myself more when it comes to the transgender community. And, just we were talking about this right before we started recording, but I had emailed in and I had used the word transgendered with the ED at the end, and he was very kind enough to correct me. And I know a lot of people that do that. With you seeing everything that you said, with you having time, will you please explain why that is incorrect?
Yeah, main thing is that transgender is an adjective, not a verb. So verbs can be past tense. I walked. Uh, and of course, English, the weird thing, I ran. So not ed. But when you add ed on the end of the adjective, it's no longer an adjective, it's a verb. And the act of transitioning is definitely a verb. And the making decision to transition either socially or medically and stuff, that's a verb. But our identity is something that isn't done. It isn't performative. It is who we are. So it's really important that we stick that firmly in the realm of adjective. And I also tell people, like, if you want to be like the super grammar ally, not only do you stick that in the realm of adjective, but you stick that in the realm of separate word adjective. We're all into people first language. So that is a person with autism. That is a person who has a disability. That's not a disabled person. So we lead with this person first language. And for trans persons, too often our entire existence is distilled down into us being trans. I mean, for me, I kind of chose a job that made that my life. So like I consented to it. But for a lot of my clients, they don't want trans to be the first thing there is. And when you make it a verb and everything that they have to do every day, or you make it a noun, like a transgender, that is all they are. And so move trans into adjective and make it a separate word. Trans space man, trans space woman. That gives us the room to be without being trans all the time. We are, but at a baseball game, it's far more prevalent than I am a White Sox fan instead of a trans man.
Right.
Like, context is really important. There are a whole bunch of different identities that fit me. I love baseball. I love dark beer. I've heard slightly effeminate and soft butch. I'm fine with either.
What?
Yeah. Like talking about my expression, like I'm slightly effeminate, but like soft butch gay man. And I felt really honored that a lesbian person used that term for me. Like I am all these different things. I'm not just trans. And so when you move that word into adjective, you let me be all the things I am. And it's a beautiful like little grace that you can grant us. Also, it sounds a little weird when you use it with other LGBT identities. So lesbian, gay.
Yes, I remember you. You were so sweet about it, because I read it and I was like, oh shit. It's like, I hope I didn't offend them, but I could tell I didn't offend you. You just were correcting me, which I appreciate. If I'm saying something or doing something wrong, please correct me, because I'm not trying to be offensive at all. But I really appreciate you saying that, because that helped me. I told you that helped me correct somebody also. But the way that you just explained it more in depth, which is more in depth than our email that I was talking about, it makes sense, because I hate when people, like somebody inboxed me on Instagram and basically was saying that somebody told them about me, that I had a podcast and they wanted to collaborate, and the first thing they said was me bisexual. I'm like, wait, there's so much more to me being fucking bisexual. So you breaking it down like that makes complete sense. Thank you so much. and that this, I mean, and it may sound very minute to some people, but it is those little things are very important. Like I'm more than a bisexual person. You know, I there's a lot to this chick here than just that. It just is. Um,
And you hit the nail on the head about like what we all need to be doing for each other as queer folk and as just people. My approach to building allies and doing these gentle corrections is like 9 out of 10 times when I see something that's written wrong, my first instinct is to just laugh. And I'm not laughing at you, I'm just laughing at the ridiculousness of language. But also at realizing that language holds this immense capacity for us to show empathy for another, and to show caring for one another. And so that's why I think like oftentimes everyone from like my best friend's little sister who's like 7 to my partner who's he's in his 50s, we'll leave it that way, and to my cisgender very Catholic mother who does not understand the queer community at all. A lot of the frustration comes around like there's just so many words I can't even keep up anymore, all these different terms. It's like, yeah, and that's the whole point of language. It's for us to communicate with one another. And when somebody asks you to do something that maybe you're like, I don't even know how to be politically correct, replace that with compassionate. They're asking you to use these words as a way to show compassion, to show understanding, to show space for that other person to exist as they are.
Oh yes, I love that.
And it's a lot. And full disclosure, I get it wrong a lot. I get people's pronouns wrong. I get like I don't stay up on a lot of it. Like I get a lot of different terms wrong. Mars and I, who's one of my friends who was on this podcast, like we had this extensive in-depth talk about trans and or non-binary. Like I don't get this right 100% of the time, and I'm the quote unquote professional trans person. So the burden is definitely there, but the end result is that you are making space for a person to exist genuinely as themselves, and that's something they want to do with you, and that is a gift. So when people go, I'm sorry, I don't want to offend, you're not offending, you're trying. Hell, you're just like, you just made my day. And I think too, the doubly thing is if you're worried that you're not staying up on top of it, I would say this extends to any minority group. Pay attention to the voices you're listening to. When Black Lives Matter first started a few years back, I took a look at my Facebook feed and I realized that I was following less than 2 Black creators or content makers or influencers. And then again, the most recent round of Black Lives Matter, I realized that less than 10% of my info streams were Black. And I was like, I'm not doing enough to hear Black voices. And so if you feel like you can't keep up with the LGBT community, follow our creators. Follow different pages targeted towards us. Hear our stories. There are so many memes out there that have so many cute little catchphrases that will make remembering all the different details of language super easy. 9/10 of my language section in my ally building workshops are just memes I've borrowed from a whole bunch of different trans people. And when you change your info stream, and we have like these handy dandy little computers in our pockets all the time, so you can passively just like a whole bunch of different pages and be fed this info stream, and passively just work on your vocabulary so you are always in the know. That's not hard to do. Just take 5 minutes to go like a bunch of trans pages, and then go from there. Like I did for, as a white person wanting to be a better ally for persons of color, and particularly for Black persons, I realized that I needed to up like my content intake of Black voices to hear about those experiences, to understand how to talk about them, and to, more importantly, act for them. Act in a way where I'm using my white privilege for good. 5 minutes out of your day, headache gone for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I've noticed past week, I've seen it's been different people basically sharing a meme saying, like, instead of saying his and her, say they, or it, the different pronouns, and or say, instead of hey ladies and gentlemen, say hey y'all or hey you all, and all of that kind of stuff. So I was looking at that and I'm like, that's very interesting, because I am a cisgendered woman. Is that correct? Did I say that right? I said
Cisgender?
cisgendered.
Oh, it's
Just
cisgender.
just
You get an
cisgender.
adjective too. Yeah, you get the adjective too.
I'm a cisgender woman, and so, and we all go to school learning the pronouns he, she, her, him, they. And so I think that confuses people because it's just programming. That's what we were all programmed to learn. And so we're unlearning everything, or I'll speak for myself. I am making it my business to unlearn so that I can better understand. Because again, I tell people all the time, that was one of the reasons why I created this podcast, and I called it Under the Umbrella, because I wanted to encompass everyone. The letters are changing constantly. The only one I will not ever accept is pedophile. If I keep hearing about that bullshit wanting to be put under our umbrella, I'm going to pull my hair out my head. I saw something this morning. I was so, oh my God, I was so mad. That does not belong under our umbrella at all. I don't care how anybody try to dissect it with their sweet little, soft voices. Fuck no. But those of us who are transgender, who are bisexual, who are pansexual, who are gay, who are lesbian, of course our allies, which I'm grateful for all of them out there, because there are a ton of them. But I called it that, and then I tell people, just because I'm under this umbrella does not mean I understand everybody's walk of life. Like my wife, when she first met me being bisexual, she didn't understand. She just was like most people, like, you're not attracted. She had to go through this moment of people are not attracted to both sexes, until she met me, and she's like, oh, you really are attracted to both sexes. Damn. So does, and of course, being someone being trans, I don't understand. So I'm making it my business to understand, you know. So I appreciate you with this knowledge. And I know we could probably talk about this. This could be a podcast series all by itself for those who want to understand. Because I even had a friend who was asking me to break down some different, break down what being a lesbian is, being what gay means. And it's just like, it sounds so simple, and I can explain it from my point of view, but that may not be the next person's point of view. So I can see this podcast just growing to be just a beautiful learning experience, some kinky stories like Mars in there. Just love it. You know what I mean? But I really appreciate that, because I only transgender person I had ever met in my life was right before we left St. Louis. His name is Steph Perkins. Oh my gosh, such an amazing individual. And so I love that I am, in my own way, attracting transgender people into my life so I can learn more about them, because I consider myself a very loving, compassionate, very empathetic person. And there's nothing wrong with educating yourself on other people's walks of life. You know what I mean? That much more in depth.
And you showed that compassion like incredibly well. Just like full credit give to you. Not everybody accepts feedback or instruction or change or a little bit of push with grace. And you don't just accept it with grace, you accept it with enthusiasm, which is, I didn't know how to react except just to smile and be super happy. Like, dang me, okay. And I think that's, like, we talk so often about building up allies and things like that. And for me, that's kind of where my role tends to be falling more and more, because I am more cis-assumed. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a bar with a whole bunch of like very butch, cis, heteronormative, stereotypically masculine, somewhat toxically masculine men, and they go on and on about Caitlyn Jenner dead naming her, or they talk about Laverne Cox, or they say some inappropriate things Or even let's remove the trans thing from the debate. The things I hear about what men say about women, not knowing that I was never a woman, but I was raised as a woman. And I know some of the, like, I know what it's like to feel like you cannot take up space in this world, and how your opinion is lesser, and how you are not warranted the same access and privileges as other persons, simply because they have an Audi. Or people think that they have an Audi, as opposed to an Mini. But when I hear these things, it blows their mind when I gently go, well, why do you think that? And they go, well, they expect me to buy in because I look like one of them. And then I also gently tell them, like, well, as someone who has a vagina and was born as a woman, I tend to disagree with that premise. And they just go, and I'm not, they're freaked out, they're on their guard, and I'm not necessarily, well, I kind of am attacking them. But I'm calling them out. And it's a whole different world when somebody from privilege calls out somebody else in that same level of privilege.
Absolutely.
And that's why, like, I tend to go more into ally building things. And I found more and more that a lot of times people are hesitant to be allies is because they have framed this mindset that being an ally is a difficult thing. And honey, it is. Ally is a verb, not a noun. It is something you do every day. And it is something that takes an incredible amount of humility. But we don't talk about the benefits of that. And you are an example, like you just exude those benefits, the joy of learning new things, the wonderful connection that comes with people who are different than you and also similar. I'm sure that your life and your experiences, at least what you share with me, has been enriched by people who are different than you and think different than you and walks of life are different than you.
Yeah.
And you have found joy in that. And that's what we really need to be selling. Different does not mean less than. Different just means different.
Yeah.
And different means beautiful because it opens up the realm of possibilities. I've had cisgender men come up to me after going through different ally trainings or even just being my friend, and they give me the feedback of, you had to construct your own manhood, which means that you didn't come with a lot of baggage that I did. And you have just taught me how to be a man in a non-toxic way. And I had no clue how to do that. And you had to figure that out yourself. But I've been struggling with that for years. And I helped them. And then they helped me. Like, this one took place in October. They helped me the very next month by voting out a trans bigot. Like, we should be there supporting each other, helping each other, making like beautiful connections with each other. We're not just doing this to check off a little box or just a moral implication or because it's what good empathetic people do. We're doing it for those reasons.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
also you get something out of this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's shown you're just a joyful person. And I think you're a joyful person because you appreciate diversity. And you,
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, don't get me started. Like I do, I told you before we started recording, I cannot stomach hateful people. That drives me just nuts. But I love cultures and I love diversity. I love people. You know, people can make things so complicated and can be so freaking annoying. But as a whole, I really do love people and how, you know, I guess being on the more positive side, how loving and how compassionate we can be and giving, and that I still have faith in humanity. I just do. So, you know, even though this is a podcast that people may listen to and, you know, go about their day, I really hope people are taking just something from it every time they listen to it. Even if they never tell me, you don't have to tell me. Just I hope they're learning also. You know, I haven't gotten any negative feedback thus far, and I'm just so grateful for that. And if there is any negativity, I haven't seen or heard it, and I'd like to keep.
There's there's an author I follow, John Green. He's like famous for writing The Fault in Our Stars. He also has a YouTube channel and he has a podcast called The Anthropocene Reviewed, where he reviews the human existence on a 5-star scale. And there's this little part where he's talking about having conversations with his kids, and it only ultimately ends up as, well, despite everything, I still think the human endeavor is still worthwhile. And I think sometimes when we, particularly in this pandemic, when we're at work and things and we're just shuffling around and we're trying to get the bills paid, trying to get the kids to school, trying to get ourselves ready, trying to focus like, all right, how do I plan for retirement? How do I do this? How do I do that? Oh my God, I have to sell my house because of the pandemic and this and this and this. And it's like we get busy with the noise. But when I think about when we're really here, this whole human endeavor, the joy that I consistently tend to find is in with connecting other people and by unifying in that kind of not necessarily shared experience, but in the sharing of experiences. And so when you take a step back, either by connecting with a friend who's different than you, or the guys at the bar who were very confused after I dropped that bomb, or listening to Under the Umbrella podcast, like you get that moment where you're like, the whole human endeavor is worthwhile because connecting with each other is what brings this ultimate sense of fulfillment. And I think that's particularly prevalent now in the pandemic, where when you think about how our lives have changed radically in many, many different ways.
Oh, yeah.
But the first priority I see in almost every way it has changed is to make sure we stay connected.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you realize that in the midst of a global crisis, that is our ultimate priority, to stay connected, whether or not it says stay connected through keeping people alive so that they're still here, or stay connected by making sure that Zoom can handle more calls than it's ever had to handle before, or staying connected by like making sure that kids can still go to school, whether it be digitally or safely in person, and it's digitally.
Yes.
Like,
oh.
Yeah, like
somebody posted something today about that. I'm sorry, well, you just reminded me. Somebody posted something. Their teacher, and they basically said like when the kids go back to school. This is back in Missouri, I guess, but the teachers would have to. I mean, the parents would have to sign a waiver in the event, basically, their child dies. That I'm like, wait, what? That lets you know that they don't need to go back to school. That the teachers, the principals, nobody is ready for this yet. It is not time for them to go back. But
and it tells, like, there's definite economic pressures and wanting parents to go back to work and the need for places to go. And a lot of kids aren't set up for digital learning and their parents can't supervise them.
I know it's so many layers. Yeah.
But it's not worth it. It is not worth the lives. It's not worth the lives of the support staff. It's not worth the lives of the teachers. And for every teacher that may be conscripted into that risk, I apologize as an American. I want you to stay home and stay safe, and I will vote in whatever way I can to make sure that happens.
Absolutely.
And I will share your stories and do things like that. And I think that teachers too, like, they want their kids to stay connected. We all want to stay connected. We all want to get back to our lives. But when we look at really where our priorities are lying, where I hear a lot of people advocating for the things, it's not for just, a lot of people are talking about the money and the economic, like the job market, the housing market, this and this. More often than not, daily on my Facebook page, it's people desperately trying to make sure they stay connected. And that tells me that that's what we should be focusing on. If that is something that a nation as diverse as America and as diverse as the world can agree on, that we need to somehow stay connected to get over this so that we can be together again. That's what we should be paying attention to. And we could do that in big ways by running for office, or we do that in smaller ways by sharing stories on a podcast.
Yeah.
All of it is worth, the human endeavor is still worthwhile.
Yeah. I agree. That is beautiful. Man, I cannot wait till I get a chance to hug you in person. I just cannot
I
wait to
am
hug
crazy.
y'all.
I said this before we started recording, but I'll say it again. Like, I went to my hairstylist and he touched my hair, and I was like very guttural. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. I am so lucky. Like, I have a closed loop system with my partner and with another household. Like, we do not interact outside of each other.
Yeah.
So I get like hugs. It's not enough. I want more hugs.
Right.
Let's
I
be
get hugs.
real.
I get hugs from my wife. We have a very loving home, her and I. But I'm a very outgoing person. So I love being around people. I'm fine. I've learned some crafty things about. I've learned a lot about myself being at home and just learning a lot about myself. But I still can't wait to be able to go out and even just going to a restaurant that's open, even if it's only 4 or 5 people that can sit at tables, kind of far from me because I'm just sitting there smiling and eating. I know they're probably like, you such a weirdo. But it's just nice to slowly get back to normal, our version of normal.
But before COVID, I already had the problematic issue. I was late everywhere. I already had the problematic issue of being like an introverted extrovert, where I would just randomly ask people how their day is going and then get into a really in-depth conversation with them. I don't know why. It has been like this since kindergarten. And it drives my partner absolutely insane sometimes because we can never get anywhere on time. It has exponentially gotten worse with COVID because I'm so starved for that. I had a 25-minute conversation with our cashier at Safeway about White Claw. 25 minutes. And about how White Claw, like how it's a very versatile drink and how that relates to having versatile parties and how this relates to this. And I don't know this person. I don't even remember her name, but I had a 25-minute conversation with her.
Yeah.
And any excuse I have now to interact with people, like, oh my God, you're here, you're in real life, let's talk. I don't even care who you are.
Trust me, I understand.
Yeah, I have a feeling you're the same kind of person. Your wife going like this, we need to go. We need to go.
I can't help it. I've been like that. That was one thing my teachers would always say to my mother when I was growing up is she's a joy to have in class. She's very smart, but she's just very talkative. Like, is that the really worst thing you have to worry about? But no, I totally understand. Been like this for a long time, and I'm okay with it.
I found in my mom's, like, my mom kept everything, and I mean everything. And so I found this award I got in preschool. It was like one of those after-school programs, like you're in kindergarten when you're 4, and then you go to a preschool program. It was like the sassiest award ever. So they gave me the award most lovable. And this little like tagline was attached to it on the trophy. And it's like, they said, your child is absolutely adorably lovable. Of course, back then it was she, but she gives every member a hug, says hello to everyone. And by the time that she was done saying hello, we are finally able to start lunch. And it was sassy. Because we got there at 9 a.m. and I'm done saying hello to everybody 3 hours later.
You can learn so much from children. They are so sweet and lovable and loving and so they're just so innocent, and you can learn so much just from. I talk about that all the time. Just watching children. I just love sitting watching kids because they are what we're supposed to be, but once we start raising them with, whatever's our ideologies and whatever else we raise them with, that's what changes them into, whatever, until they decide they don't want to be, if it's something, negative, like if they're raised to be hateful, they have to make a decision to get away from that. But kid children are just so innocent and loving and just so happy.
The most anticlimactic part of my job is every time there's a trans parent. So a trans individual who was mom is becoming dad, or was dad is becoming mom, or is coming out somewhere beyond those binary roles. The number one concern a lot of them have, particularly if the kid is below the age of 10, is like, I don't know if they're going to understand it, or they're going to be okay with it, or this. And so we talk about like how to come out to your kid, and how to work with your partner, and partners on board, what that's like, and how to answer their questions in age appropriate ways. I give them a few resources and books. And then I kind of chuckle to myself after they leave, because I know I'm going to get a call within the next week where last time it happened, okay, so I came out to my kid, and I'm like, and she went, okay, daddy, on a dime, flipped, just done. Like all that angst and build up. Nah, they're good. They don't need it. They're like, cool, fine. And so the parent has like this letdown, and my job at this point is to tell them like, you got what you wanted, like, and they don't know what to do with all this built up angst. And instead it's coming out to kids is sometimes the easiest thing to do. I used to be a teacher's aide in a preschool. Nobody had an issue. Nobody. All the kids were pretty just like chill. They were like, okay, okay, Mr. Ian. Like sometimes they mess it up, and then they would police themselves. Like there was one parent at that preschool who she transitioned, and somebody went up and goes, oh, hi, Mr. So-and-so. And the other kid, one of the other kids, who was not related to this family, just went, it's Miss now, Miss, with a cute little lisp.
Oh.
And he just went, oh, hi, Miss So-and-so. Kids are wonderful. They just get it.
Yeah, they really are. Oh. Well, Ian, I don't think I have any more questions at the moment, so I have to sit and think about them. I do know my personal mission right now is learning more about the trans community. And I think there was somebody who started following me on Instagram, and they had just told me, I don't know if they have a podcast also, but I just remember them saying that they're a person of color, non-binary, transgender, and it was something else. And I was like, holy shit. I'm like, okay, because I mean, that's just something, just a lot of stuff in the trans community is just, I don't know about. I'm like, what? So I got to figure out the questions, or maybe just go back and read through what we were talking about so I can, just unpack their story, help them unpack their story, because they seemed like they were still trying to figure it out. And I'm like, well, that's okay, But I just, like I said, I say it to everybody right now, like that's just a personal mission of mine. And I think it's not because of that, but I do. And I always tell people how I keep hearing about stories of trans women of color whose lives are taken and is not being talked about. It doesn't sit well with me. It just bothers me so bad. And I want to do my best to get people's stories told and heard. I really do. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart, so that I can educate myself as well as my listeners. So, I know people keep saying they'll come back. So I really hope, that you'll be back for any other discussions, or if there's something that you feel that you want to talk about further, if you want to come back, please, I don't mind having you back on so we can chat, and I'll try to stay on topic.
I don't mind if he's like, as long as we check all the boxes I need to for my job, we're good. And the cool thing, like, as long as we stay topic adjacent, we're always going to be talking about something important. And thank you for taking my story and carrying it. If you want, like, I think I told you this, I have my own web series called Ask a Navigator. It's usually every Thursday night, but there's a couple of hiatus because of family emergencies and having to get my eye cut open. Yeah, you remember that fun. Sorry, I can't do the podcast today. I have an eye patch. But we're bringing it back where every Thursday night at 6, I talk about trans-related subjects. So I've done identity documents, how to be an ally, HIV in the trans community. And this week it's Mars and I talking about non-binary experiences. So
Oh
if
my
you
gosh.
want,
Will you please email that to me?
yeah. So if you want, you can listen to us and then we can come back and do like part 2
Okay.
with both of us.
Yes, I was. Oh my God, I would so love that. I really would. I would so love that. My wife was listening to the episode with Mars this morning. She was like, "Oh my God, I just love him. I love his laugh. He just sounds so carefree and happy. You know what I mean? Just, and I'm sure he, has, because he mentioned a couple of things on a podcast, but overall, he just seemed like he's just a very loving person, and you could just hear it through the episode. You really could. I would.
Mars,
Yeah, please email me that so I can tune in, and I would love to have you both back if you both are okay with that.
I won't speak for Mars, but I'm pretty sure that I can motivate them. I mean, we have conversations about all this stuff all the time. And after every conversation, we have like, wow, we needed that. And like, we don't, that's the fun part about being trans for us. Like, when you get to the point in your transition experience where you're like gender nihilistic 97% of the time, like what point of transition is that? Where you start to just identify as tired. What sort of transition is that? So I definitely ask them. I'll send you the link to Ask a Navigator. It's an open forum. Everybody's welcome to tune in. It's definitely more centric on Arizona trans experiences because that's where we're located. There's a lot of good, useful info. And I'm always looking for suggestions for new topics. So if you wanted me to do a topic, like we can kind of keep this cycle going, that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Cool. I look forward to that. I look forward to it. Oh man, I hate to let you go. Thank you so much. You and Mars, I can sit and talk to you both of you like all day. My wife probably be like, seriously, can we eat dinner? Can we eat breakfast? Yes, go ahead. I'm gonna wrap this up. And an hour later.
Welcome to how a 30-minute coffee chat to meet Mars turned into a 4-hour dinner.
Right. But I won't keep you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your personal story, your personal journey. I appreciate the knowledge and education that you've dropped. And I want to say to the audience, I've been trying to remember to say this at the end of the episodes. As people go about their day, just know that you are loved, you are supported, you are enough, and you are for damn sure worthy. And don't let any other soul on this earth tell you otherwise. Like, you really are. There's so much love and support out here. It just is. And I just want that to get ingrained in people's minds and hearts and know that people are here to love and support them.
Thank you for that, and thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You take care, okay?
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on Under the Umbrella podcast. Check us out on Instagram at UT Umbrella, on Facebook at 1UT Umbrella. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Under the Umbrella, and visit our website at utumbrella.com. As always, subscribe to the show to catch every new episode, and leave a review so we can continue to bring you fresh content. If you have a question to submit for the Ask Angel segment, please submit to contact@utumbrella.com. See you next week.